Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Tom bought his dream home, he expected peace, not war. But all it took was one entitled neighbor, one stolen parking spot, and one towed SUV to ignite the HOA battle of the century. Buckle up, this is the wild, hilarious, and utterly infuriating story of Tom vs. Karen. Tom Harris had never imagined that suburban peace could feel this unnerving. After finalizing his divorce, he'd bought what he called his fresh start home, a charming one-story house nestled at the end of a cul-de-sac in a quiet Arizona neighborhood. The property was his sanctuary, modern yet modest, with a wide, freshly paved private driveway and no ties to the adjacent homeowners association. That detail had been crucial when he chose this location. He liked privacy, autonomy, and the idea that nobody could tell him what to do with his shutters or where to place his trash bins. It was a sunny Tuesday morning, the kind where everything felt just a little too perfect. Birds chirped, his coffee was still hot, and his golden retriever, Murphy, lay curled at his feet on the porch. That peace shattered the moment Tom looked up from his mug. A large, glossy black Cadillac Escalade was parked squarely across his driveway. His driveway, boldly occupying the exact spot where he usually parked his own car. Confused, he scanned the quiet street. No construction, no emergency vehicles, and certainly no note on the windshield. It wasn't until he saw the Escalade's driver returning, high heels clacking confidently down the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, that the situation crystallized. Karen Manners. Tom had seen her before, hovering near HOA signs and organizing neighborhood events with military precision. She looked over at him like she was surprised he'd noticed the intrusion. "Oh, Tom, right?" she called out with a rehearsed smile. "I just needed a spot real quick for the HOA Finance Committee meeting. I figured no harm in using your space. It's not like it's city regulated or anything, right?" Tom blinked slowly. "This is private property. My private driveway." Karen waved dismissively, her bangled wrist jingling like a warning bell. "Of course. It's just so tight on our street with all the renovations and traffic. It's just easier here." Tom stood up. He didn't raise his voice, didn't even step off the porch. "Don't do it again, Karen. Next time, I'll have it towed." She laughed, actually laughed, and waggled a finger in mock admonishment as she turned back toward her car. "You're funny, Tom. We need more neighbors like you. Chill, but involved." With that, she slipped into her car and reversed down his driveway like nothing happened. Tom exhaled slowly, watching her drive away, her taillights blinking like smug little winks. Murphy growled low, almost in agreement. Tom patted his dog's head and took another sip of coffee. He had no idea yet just how far Karen would go, but something told him that Cadillac was just the beginning. The next morning, Tom's alarm went off at 7 a.m., just like always. He brewed his coffee, stepped onto his porch with Murphy at his side, and froze. There it was again, the same glossy black Cadillac Escalade, smugly parked in the middle of his driveway like it owned the place. No note, no apology, just the sheer audacity of entitlement gleaming under the morning sun. He stared at it for a few moments, waiting to see if Karen would magically appear again with a winning smile and another flimsy excuse. But the street was empty, save for the sound of a distant lawnmower and a bird chirping far too cheerily for the situation. Tom turned, walked back inside, and calmly picked up his phone. Within minutes, he was on the line with a local towing company. "Yes," he said, "it's an unauthorized vehicle on private property. My driveway. Yes, I've warned the owner. Yesterday, in fact." The tow truck arrived less than half an hour later. The driver, a bulky man with a scruffy beard and a look that said this wasn't his first HOA conflict, nodded at Tom with a grin. "She parked without asking? Yeah, this neighborhood's got a reputation." As the Escalade was lifted and hauled away, Tom felt a strange mix of satisfaction and dread. He hadn't wanted to escalate anything, but he'd been clear, and Karen had ignored him, either believing he wouldn't act or genuinely not caring. Both were unacceptable. Around 10 a.m., just as he was finishing up an email for work, there was a loud, aggressive knock on the door. Tom opened it to find Karen standing there, her sunglasses perched on her head, arms crossed, and jaw clenched like she was holding back a primal scream. "You had my car towed," she demanded, voice sharp as a slap. "I told you I would," Tom replied evenly. "It's my property. You were warned." Karen scoffed, her hands flailing in indignation. That was a community compromise. You don't understand how things work around here. You're new, Tom. There's a flow to this neighborhood, a sense of shared space. You're disrupting that. No, Karen, you're trespassing on private property. That's what's being disrupted. She stood there for a beat, visibly vibrating with disbelief. This is going to have consequences, she hissed, and with a final glare, turned on her heel and stormed off. Tom didn't flinch, but that night, after walking Murphy around the block, he returned home to find a paper taped to his mailbox. Notice of violation, unapproved modifications to driveway aesthetic, noise disturbance due to tow truck, failure to comply with community standards. The letterhead was from the HOA, though Tom's home was legally not a part of it. He read the whole thing, then burst out laughing. Loud, genuine, incredulous laughter, the kind you let out when you realize you're being targeted by a suburban villain who thinks she's the protagonist of a legal drama. Murphy barked in agreement. Tom wasn't just being harassed, he was being drafted into a war he hadn't signed up for, but he wasn't going to roll over. Instead, he made a quiet decision that night. From now on, everything would be documented. The next morning, a sturdy metal post was installed at the entrance of his driveway with a sign that read, in bold block letters, "Private property, do not park. Area under video surveillance. Violators will be towed without notice." Karen passed by during the installation, slowing her jog just enough to give Tom a sarcastic thumbs up. He returned it with a nod and the kind of smile that says, "You have no idea what I'm capable of, but you're about to find out." The sign did its job. Visibly, at least. Karen never parked in Tom's driveway again, but in her mind, the towing of her beloved Escalade had not been an isolated act of property defense. It was an attack, a declaration of war, a betrayal of the sacred suburban social order where she was the unchallenged queen. And queens, of course, didn't retreat. They retaliated. It began subtly, almost comically. Tom would wake to find his trash bins knocked over, always after midnight, always without a trace of who had done it. One morning, he opened his mailbox and found a printed list of suggested HOA-compliant exterior paint colors slipped inside, with his own home's beige tone circled in red pen and labeled non-standard. He chuckled, crumpled it, and tossed it into the recycling bin with a satisfying flick of the wrist. But Karen wasn't acting alone anymore. She had activated the full HOA apparatus. Suddenly, there were strangers pacing near the edges of his property, teenagers holding tablets and snapping photos under the pretense of aesthetic documentation. A man with a clipboard approached Tom one Saturday afternoon, claiming to be conducting a voluntary compliance survey. Tom simply raised an eyebrow and pointed to the "No Trespassing" sign beneath his camera. Then came the official letter, this time mailed certified and stamped with a smug HOA seal. It accused Tom of several community violations, unauthorized signage, aggressive fencing, and visual disharmony with HOA-adjacent zones. The wording was absurd, written in a tone of bureaucratic menace that seemed to have been copied from a villainous Disney lawyer's playbook. But what truly made Tom laugh was the phrase, "hostile landscaping design choices." He poured himself a glass of iced tea, sat on the porch with Murphy, and read it aloud with dramatic flair. Murphy wisely looked unimpressed. Tom wasn't naive. He knew what this was. Karen and her HOA cronies were trying to grind him down through paper cuts. Small, persistent acts of intimidation meant to pressure him into either submitting or making a mistake. But Tom didn't crack. He documented everything. Every letter, every photo taken, every visit. His house had become its own self-defending fortress, armed not with moats or barbed wire, but with cloud-connected motion cameras, a redundant USB archive system, and a folder on his desktop labeled Evidence, Karengate. Then came the oddest moment yet. A neighbor Tom barely knew stopped him during his morning walk to sheepishly apologize. "Karen said you were putting up a garage casino." I didn't believe her. Just wanted to say, sorry for not waving lately." Tom blinked, thanked him, and made a mental note. Karen was now resorting to community gossip warfare. Still, the boldest move came during a weekday afternoon while Tom was working from his home office. The alert from his driveway camera pinged. He checked the feed and saw Karen standing in his driveway with a tape measure, flanked by 2 HOA board members. She paced with exaggerated precision, pointing at invisible violations and marking problem zones on a map clipped to her clipboard. At one point, she tripped over Murphy's tennis ball and shot the camera a glare that could have set fire to dry grass. Tom didn't intervene. He simply added the footage to the collection. By now, his home had transformed from peaceful haven to passive-aggressive battleground, and he was oddly at peace with that. Let Karen play her games. Let the HOA stack up its fictional charges. He wasn't backing down, because while Karen fancied herself the architect of order, Tom was quietly becoming her worst nightmare, an intelligent, prepared, and infuriatingly calm opponent who never rose to the bait, but always had the receipts. Tom had gotten used to the rhythm of surveillance. The soft ping of his cameras no longer startled him. They'd become part of his daily background noise, like bird song or the occasional low growl from Murphy when a squirrel got too cocky. Most alerts were harmless. Passing joggers, curious kids, HOA scouts with clipboards wandering too close. But on a warm Thursday night, just past midnight, his phone buzzed, and something about it felt different. He glanced at the feed from his driveway and immediately sat up in bed, heart thumping. The grainy night vision image flickered, and there she was, Karen. Unmistakably Karen in a hoodie pulled tight over her unmistakable blonde bob, crouching beside his steel gate like a burglar in a soap opera. 2 teenage boys, probably the same survey volunteers from earlier weeks, stood behind her holding flashlights and looking deeply unsure about their life choices. Tom whispered a curse and grabbed his phone's screen record function. The camera's infrared picked up everything. Karen barking whispered orders, fumbling with a bolt cutter far too big for her hands. She was actually trying to break the lock on his gate. A metallic clatter rang out. The gate shook. Murphy curled at Tom's feet, lifted his head, and gave a low growl, sensing something was off. Tom was already moving, pulling on a hoodie, sliding into sneakers, heart racing not with fear, but with stunned disbelief. Is this seriously happening? He didn't go outside. Not yet. Instead, he called 911 with calm precision. "Yes, I'd like to report an attempted break-in on my property," he said, eyes never leaving the live footage. "The intruder is the president of the local HOA. She's trying to force entry through my locked gate. Yes, I have video, real-time and archived." The dispatcher hesitated before asking, "Did you just say the HOA president?" "Oh yeah," Tom said grimly, "and she brought an entourage." Outside, Karen was muttering loudly now, her frustration visible even through the haze of night vision. "Why the hell won't this lock break?" she hissed. "This is community territory. He's just squatting on it with his tech toys and smug signs." One of the boys mumbled, "Ms. Manners, this feels illegal." That was the moment Tom decided it was time to show himself. He stepped onto his front porch and flipped on every exterior floodlight. The yard lit up like a stage, and on cue, Karen froze, caught in a halo of cold white light, bolt cutter in mid-swing. "Evening," Tom called, voice low and measured, though adrenaline surged in his veins. "Need help finding your dignity?" Karen spun around, eyes wild, like a villain unmasked mid-scheme. "This isn't what it looks like. It looks like you're committing felony trespass and attempted property damage," Tom replied. Which, conveniently, is exactly what it is. A siren whooped in the distance, growing louder. Karen dropped the bolt cutter like it had burned her. The 2 teens backed away, faces pale as copier paper. Moments later, a cruiser pulled up, lights flashing. Officer Delgado stepped out, a man Tom had met once before when a different neighbor filed a noise complaint about Murphy's enthusiastic barking during a thunderstorm. "Mr. Harris," Delgado nodded. "What have we got here?" Tom held up his phone, thumb hovering over the play button. Video evidence of an HOA-sanctioned break-in. Karen launched into a frenzied explanation, arms waving. "This is a misunderstanding. His gate. It's blocking access to community-adjacent visual continuity zones. It's not even legal." Delgado looked at her like she'd spoken in Martian. "Ma'am, you were cutting a private lock on private property. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a crime." "I am the HOA president," she shrieked. Delgado sighed. "Lady, you could be Queen of England. It's still trespassing." The next hour was a flurry of flashlights, statements, paperwork, and questions. Tom kept quiet, letting his footage do the talking. The officers were more amused than alarmed, especially when Karen tried to explain that she was reclaiming visual access on behalf of the community. One officer whispered to the other, "Is that a real HOA term, or did she just invent that?" Karen was eventually escorted off the property, still sputtering about bylaws and community order. One of the teenagers turned to Tom as they were led away and murmured, "I'm so sorry, dude." Tom just gave him a nod. "Hey, everyone makes mistakes. Yours just happened to be assisting a suburban warlord." As the cruiser rolled away, Tom stood on his driveway, staring at the scuff marks on his gate and the bolt cutter lying in the dirt. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even rattled. He felt clear, focused, ready. This wasn't neighborhood drama anymore. This was a legal battle now. And Tom? He was armed to the teeth, with evidence, timelines, surveillance logs, and enough righteous fury to ignite a class action suit. Karen had finally crossed the line, and she had no idea what was coming. Tom Harris sat in the courtroom with the stillness of a man who had nothing left to prove, because all of his proof was already lined up, carefully prepared, triple backed up on USB drives, printed exhibits, and a full-color slideshow waiting on his laptop. It had been a month since the Midnight Gate incident, and though the tire tracks from Karen's shoes had long faded from his driveway, the tension was still thick in the air. Karen Manners entered like she owned the place, hair lacquered into submission, a navy blue suit one size too tight across her shoulders, and a binder clutched to her chest like it held the 10 commandments of HOA righteousness. She didn't look at Tom as she sat down across the aisle, but he could feel her glare radiating like microwaved ego. The courtroom was full, curious neighbors, journalists, even a few HOA board members who had quietly begun to distance themselves from their embattled president. One man whispered, "She brought this on herself," before pretending to look at his phone. When the judge, a stern but weary woman named Marlene Whitaker, entered and the room rose, the silence felt electric. Case number 0483B, Thomas Harris versus Karen Manners and the Verde Canyon Homeowners Association, civil complaint involving property trespass, harassment, attempted damage, and unlawful HOA enforcement. The clerk read aloud. Karen's attorney, a jittery man with a discount briefcase and a tie with ducks on it, stood first. "Your Honor, we argue that Mr. Harris's property is effectively part of the visual and functional community managed by the HOA. The judge held up a hand. "Stop right there. Let me be very clear. If this argument relies on made-up phrases like visual annexation or community symmetry, I'm not interested. We're dealing with property law, not abstract poetry." Tom had to stifle a grin. Then it was his turn. His lawyer, a sharp, composed woman named Olivia Grant, rose. Her voice was crisp, deliberate, and absolutely lethal in its clarity. "Your Honor, we will prove that my client's property has never been within HOA jurisdiction. We will show that Mrs. Manners led a coordinated campaign of harassment, trespassing, and defamation, including an attempted forced entry, caught entirely on surveillance footage. The defendant's actions were not only unauthorized, but criminal in nature." The slideshow began. Frame 1, a still of Karen parking in Tom's driveway, time-stamped, GPS tagged. Frame 2, a copy of the certified letter Tom received from the HOA, with ridiculous violations listed, highlighted in neon yellow. Frame 3, security footage of Karen, bolt cutters in hand, crouched like a cartoon villain beneath Tom's gate at 12:42 a.m., muttering to her teenage minions like they were part of a heist crew. Karen stood up, red-faced. "That video was taken without my consent." The judge leaned forward, unimpressed. "It was taken on his property, with clearly posted surveillance signs. Sit down, Mrs. Manners." The courtroom cracked with suppressed laughter. The videos continued. Tom had clips showing her pointing out violations to teen scouts, instructing them to measure his mailbox, and, in one particularly memorable moment, shouting at Murphy, "Even your dog isn't regulation." By the time Olivia played the 911 call, synced with surveillance audio of Karen whispering, "Break the damn lock before he sees us," even the bailiff was shaking his head. Karen's defense spiraled. Her attorney tried to claim community preservation. He waved a blurry map, tried to suggest that the HOA had a moral easement over Tom's lot because it looked like part of the neighborhood. Judge Whitaker's gavel hit the desk like a cannon. Moral easement? Counselor, are you asking this court to honor an aesthetic feeling over a property deed? This isn't kindergarten. Karen, seeing the case slipping, finally snapped. She stood up and began gesturing wildly. I am the HOA. I built this community. I preserved order. Do you know what happens when people like him are allowed to build fences and post snarky signs? Chaos. And that dog barks like he owns the street. Tom raised a brow. Well, he's on my property, so technically, enough, the judge said firmly. Mrs. Manners, sit down before I hold you in contempt. Karen's face went pale. She sat. An hour later, the court broke for deliberation. It didn't take long. The jury returned with unanimous verdicts on every count. The courtroom held its breath as Judge Whitaker read aloud. The court finds in favor of Mr. Harris. The defendant, Karen Manners, is ordered to pay $200,000 in damages, $50,000 for property interference, $75,000 for emotional distress and harassment, and $75,000 in punitive damages. Additionally, the HOA will be placed under external audit and court supervision for a period of no less than 12 months. Karen's jaw unhinged like a broken marionette. She turned to her lawyer. But this is my neighborhood. The judge didn't miss a beat. Not anymore. As the gavel fell, the room exploded with murmurs. Karen sat frozen, her carefully constructed facade crumbling like the HOA bylaws she used to wield like gospel. Her mascara smudged, her pride cracked, and on her overly plucked brows, the unmistakable glimmer of angry, bitter tears. Tom didn't gloat. He simply packed up his laptop, gave a polite nod to the jury, and walked out of the courtroom with Murphy waiting loyally in his car. The war was over, and Karen, she had finally been evicted from power, from illusion, and from the fantasy that she could control what she didn't own. The verdict didn't just mark the end of a court case, it marked the collapse of an entire suburban regime. Karen Manners had once been a towering figure in Verde Canyon. Her word had been law. Her clipboard an instrument of fear, but within days of the trial's conclusion, her empire began to implode with almost poetic speed. The HOA board, desperate to save face, called an emergency meeting, one that Karen was conspicuously not invited to. By the end of that meeting, her presidency had been officially revoked, her HOA access codes deleted, and her laminated parking privileges ceremoniously shredded. Word spread like wildfire. Neighbors who had once feared Karen's icy glares and cryptic compliance reminders now swapped memes of her courtroom meltdown in group chats. One clever resident pasted a blown-up screenshot of Karen holding the bolt cutters, captioned, "Chol, be sorry," to a community bulletin board. It was taken down within hours, but not before it made its way onto local Reddit and went semi-viral. Karen's personal life didn't fare any better. Rumors swirled that her husband, embarrassed and exhausted by her crusade, had moved out temporarily to clear his head. Her prized Escalade, the very car that had started it all, sat untouched in her driveway for weeks, like a monument to overreach. Meanwhile, the HOA itself faced scrutiny from both the court-appointed auditor and the residents who had long suffered in silence. Stories poured out. A retired couple fined for wind chimes that were too whimsical. A veteran warned about his American flag being too large. A teenager threatened with HOA action over a skateboard ramp. Under court supervision, these infractions were re-examined and swiftly dismissed. Refunds were issued. Apologies were made. New elections were held. This time, real candidates emerged, people who had experienced Karen's reign and had no interest in reviving it. A mild-mannered teacher named Denise was elected president, running on a platform of less rules, more gardens. A local contractor took the treasurer's seat, promising transparency and actual knowledge of zoning laws. For the first time in years, the community meetings felt more like potlucks than tribunals. And then there was Tom. No longer the guy who got Karen's car towed, he became something of a legend. Neighbors he barely knew stopped him while walking Murphy, offering high fives, banana bread, or just a quiet thank you. The phrase, pulling a Tom, became a neighborhood inside joke for standing your ground. A group of high schoolers even made a short film about the saga for their media class. Tom politely declined to star in it, but did lend them the original footage. His property became a symbol, not just of private rights, but of quiet defiance done right. He didn't throw tantrums. He didn't shout. He documented, he persisted, and he won. And that in Verde Canyon was nothing short of revolutionary. Karen's empire had fallen, but something better rose from its rubble. A community no longer ruled by fear, but rebuilt on respect, and just a hint of revenge. It was a Sunday afternoon, warm, still, almost cinematic. The kind of day where even the wind felt like it was pausing for dramatic effect. Tom sat on his porch, Murphy snoozing at his feet, a fresh cup of coffee in hand. The courtroom drama was weeks behind him. The HOA had officially rewritten its charter, and Karen had vanished into a self-imposed exile. Her house listed quietly on Zillow with the hopeful label, "Charming home in a newly peaceful community." Most believed she'd moved in with her sister out in Tucson. Others claimed she'd joined a different HOA in a neighboring town but with less authority. Nobody knew for sure, and frankly, nobody cared to ask. Tom had started to breathe again, not just live, but truly breathe. His mornings were filled with birdsong instead of surveillance alerts. His mailbox now contained actual mail instead of veiled threats. And his driveway? Blessedly empty, except for his own car exactly where it belonged. But then came the box. A simple cardboard package, no return address, left neatly on his doorstep. Taped to the top was a single Post-it note, written in unmistakably tidy looping script. Foreclosure, not compliance. K. Inside, nestled among neatly folded tissue paper, was a brand new padlock. Heavy duty, shiny, industrial strength. And beneath it, a second note. "I should have bought this instead of the bolt cutters. Good luck, Tom." Tom stared at it for a long time, unsure if it was a peace offering, a sarcastic flourish, or the last laugh of a suburban tyrant fading into legend. Probably a bit of all three. He chuckled, shook his head, and locked the new padlock onto the gate, where it clicked into place with a satisfying clack. Murphy lifted his head, tail wagging once, as if sensing the symbolic weight of the moment. Tom looked down the street, now quieter, friendlier, and entirely under new management. The war was over. The parking spot was his, and the final act of this HOA tragedy. A padlock, gift-wrapped, from the villain herself. He raised his mug toward the horizon like a toast and murmured, "Here's to boundaries well defended." Then he sat back, took a long sip, and watched the sunset wash his driveway in gold.